Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. Just going through the emergency program for California and other states now in budget crisis. Number one, no layoffs. Restore and maintain vital services at all costs. And remember the Nuremberg precedents for those who violate this. A Tobin tax or securities transfer tax, 1% state by state on all derivatives and speculative flows of money paid by the broker, paid by the institutional side of the transaction. Number three, stop all foreclosures on primary residences, farms, businesses, transportation, and any other productive or socially necessary activity. A 10% usury law should be reimposed. Now, they'll come forward and say, oh, well, that's not possible anymore after the Volcker era. There's some legislation back there. Fight it. Give your state attorney general something to do. Go to the Supreme Court. Fight, fight, fight. And remember that these decisions are ultimately going to be political. Now, the TARP. This past week, we've had some banks. J.P. Morgan Chase, we've got Goldman Sachs, we've got Morgan Stanley, American Express, and a few others, right? They have paid back $68 billion of the TARP. That is not all the TARP money that these bums have been given. And, of course, it doesn't say anything about the $12 trillion that they have been able to draw on from the Federal Reserve. This is just the Treasury money, and, of course, that's the lesser part of it. Outrageous, of course, but the lesser part in terms of magnitude. Notice Citibank and Bank of America didn't make the cut. Citibank and Bank of America have paid back nothing, so they are in big trouble. And, of course, what you see here is the functioning of the fascist corporate state, that state-sponsored compulsory cartel, to drive down wages, drive down production, and prop up fictitious capital, fictitious paper. The chosen winners, clearly enough, are J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, and perhaps a few others. Bank of New York Mellon, maybe also on the winners list. But what this does not cover, this is the least of it, because even if $70 billion has been paid back on the TARP, and this is preferred shares that are being cashed in, sold back to the government, or the government given back, that does not cover this money to AIG. Remember, AIG Insurance Company, not a bank, through their London hedge fund, sold $3 trillion of derivatives, and that is what the most money has gone into on the Treasury TARP, on the bailout from October of last year. And in particular, Société Générale of France were then paid this money on derivatives contracts by AIG. So AIG gets $200 billion almost from the Treasury, and then proceeds to do the following to wind down derivatives transactions. Société Générale of France gets $12 billion. Deutsche Bank of Germany gets $12 billion. Barclays Bank of Britain gets $8.5 billion. Union Bank of Switzerland, $5 billion. It's about $37 billion. This is enough to plug the California budget right now. Why is it, Schwarzenegger, Obama ruling elite, that Société Générale, Deutsche Bank, Barclays Bank, and Union Bank of Switzerland, all foreign zombie bankers, derivatives merchants and hedge fund hyenas, how come they are more important than the survival of the population of California? How can we do this? You got to demand the clawback of that $37 billion and the application of it to the budget deficits of the states. So time to impeach Geithner in particular, right? A big state like California with Pelosi and Feinstein and Boxer and Waxman and all those influential members of Congress. Impeach Geithner. Get him out. He transferred $37 billion to AIG and then on to the foreign banks. You can probably impeach Bernanke on that same thing. And, of course, Bernanke should disgorge his papers. Why doesn't Jerry Brown of California start seizing the assets of Société Générale, Deutsche Bank, Barclays, and UBS to call public attention to this and to begin clawing back some of these funds. So there's another possibility. Now, generally speaking, what we need, as we've talked about in the past, if you can nationalize the Federal Reserve all at once, that's good. What you can do, though, is nationalize it step by step. And that would be force Bernanke to open up a 0% Main Street lending window for productive businesses. Up to now, the entire $12 trillion of credit lines made available by the Federal Reserve goes only to financial institutions, to the parasites, in effect. That is, banks, stockbrokers now disguised as banks, credit card companies, money market mutual funds, and so forth. All paper stuff. There's no money from the Federal Reserve for production, nothing for auto, nothing for Silicon Valley, nothing for biotech, nothing for agriculture, nothing for anybody. And, of course, all these companies that are going bankrupt, they're going bankrupt because the banks refuse to lend. So, therefore, you have your own bank. Nationalize the Federal Reserve, open up a 0% emergency Main Street lending window, and force the Fed to rediscount commercial paper from local businesses that have been submitted in through the regional and local banking system. Now, that would be the way to restart lending. You want to restart lending? Restart lending. Don't say that you're giving money to zombie bankers and hope that they restart lending. That's obviously ridiculous. So, another point, the seventh point, every state has got to come up with a big project of infrastructure. I would say these can be limited because what you really want is a pilot project here. The really big money is going to come from the federal government and indeed from the nationalized Federal Reserve in the form of loans. But if you look at California, it's a natural. A magnetic levitation railway, a maglev, high-speed rail, modern high-speed rail from south to north. So start at San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, up on towards Portland and Seattle, and of course the southern extension of the thing goes towards Mexico City and on to Latin America. Now, these are super speed railways. This is more than 300 miles an hour. This is not steel wheel on steel rail. This is everything floating on a magnetic cushion. The Chinese and the Japanese have them. The Germans can build them. The U.S. is nowhere, as usual. We're back here with windmills and with bridges that fall down. This is now the junkyard and rubble field of the post-industrial society, a mockery, an obscene joke by Obama and his Malthusian controllers. So how could California do this? Well, one way is issue some bonds, get the money in. You can stimulate the sales of your bonds by saying anybody who buys these bonds now in the crisis can ride free on the maglev for life, or as long as you hold the bonds, something like this. And you can, of course, create something like a California Development Bank and put the proceeds from the bonds go into that bank, and then you use your reserve ratio to multiply the availability of the loans, and you make that then into a revolving credit facility, lending out the same money again and again and again as it comes in. One obvious thing is if your state has General Motors or Chrysler plants that have been shut down and closed, and therefore you have unemployed workers, the most elementary, the most obvious thing in the world is if you have empty factories and unemployed workers, get some credit in there, get some industrial engineering-oriented management, and put the unemployed workers back into the factories and start producing something that you need. In this case, you could reconvert those plants to build maglev, and once you're finished with your California maglev, you can start making them for export and start an economic recovery that way. A pilot project of this type. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.